Hello everyone, today we're starting a new topic in Year 12 and it's following on from 2.4a where we looked at DNA. We're looking at genetics and how your DNA affects your characteristics. So let's have a look at what you're going to need. So you should have downloaded the notes booklet, which is this one here. Okay, if you can print it out, that's great. If you're not able to print it out, well, download it onto your device, and then obviously you're going to have to look at the pages when we're talking about it. You can write in answers, and then once we get back to school, you'll get a hard copy and you can just copy up your answers in there. Okay, so you'll need the notes booklet. First thing you need to do is start numbering your pages and number with number 1 on the outside cover. So the page you can see there is number 1, and that means when you get to the end, the last page that you're writing on is page 22. Now there's a couple of blank pages after that, but basically you're going from page 1 to page 22. The other thing that you'll need is the question booklet, and again it's in this topic. If you go to classwork, look for the 2.4b genetics and you'll see the question booklet there. It's past paper questions. Same thing as before. If you can print it, that's great. If you can't print it, simply write your answers on file paper, taking care to number your answers carefully. So if you haven't got those things now, pause the video, download what you need, print if you can. So you'll probably remember seeing this photograph from the first lockdown. So this is most of your teachers here. Obviously, you probably remember the song. I don't really know why it didn't make it to the charts. But anyway, a random group of people here. If we look, I mean, they're all the same species. They're all humans. But there are lots of differences. And we call those differences, well, things like colour of the hair, if they have hair, might be bald, whether they've got a beard, moustache, whether they've got blonde hair, black hair, blue eyes, green eyes, all those kind of things. We call those differences variation. So really we mean that variation is differences between organisms of the same species. Now, in your notes, page 2 of your notes booklet, it says that underneath the heading variation, it's in bold. What I would suggest that you do is highlight that definition and write learn beside it. So variation is differences between organisms of the same species. Highlight it and write learn. So if we look at these people, again, all the same species, and I want you to pause the video for about 30 seconds and write down at least 7 ways or 7 differences that you can see amongst those people. Okay, so pause the video, try and make a list of at least 7 ways that they are different. Okay, so you're maybe thinking about things like okay, so maybe the shape of their ears. So that wee fella's ears are different from that guy's ears. His stick out a wee bit more. What else? The shape of his teeth or the position of his teeth. Whether they've got curly hair, straight hair. So there's lots of could be skin colour. Hair colour, the most obvious ones. Could be their height. So let's just go back there. Lots of different things there that we we could talk about. So those are all examples of variation. Now, hopefully you remember from year 10 that there are 2 types of and if we look at, this is last year's Irish rugby team, the squad here, you can see something like height they're all different heights. So these guys here are standing up. You would definitely say, well, that guy there's tall. That guy there's in the row behind him. He looks pretty small, standing beside Jacob Stockdale. There's another small guy. He's tall. He's tall. But as you see, there's a gradual change as we go down there. Is that guy there small? Well, I don't know. It's very difficult. You can't just split people into tall or small, or even tall, intermediate and small. There's a gradual change. If you were to, to line all those guys up in order of height, you would see just a gradual change as you were to go through. Another example here is skin colour. Sometimes we talk about people's skin colour and talk about people being a certain colour, but yet we can see we can't just put people into groups. Yes, people in the bottom here have got darker skin than people at the top, but it's not a clear cut. You can't just group these people and say, well, all these people have fair skin, all these people have dark skin. It's not as simple as that. There's a gradual change that you can see from one person to another. And the same with hair colour as well. Gradual changes. So, getting back to height here, the type of variation that we're talking about is one where there's a gradual change. You can't group people. Gradual change. If we were to take a sample of people of a certain age, so in this case adult males, and measure their heights in centimetres, line them up, you would see that there's this gradual increase in height. And if you were to then do a frequency chart where if you were to work out how many people are 150 to 156, and you'd have a small number of very small people there, you'd have a small number of very tall people at the other end, and then you would find that in the average height, you'll have most people. So most people will be of average height. So basically we're making, that graph's actually from GCSE textbook. It's not great because it probably should say something like 156 to 159. Oh no, 158, 159 to 161, 162 to 164, and so on. So there should be categories there. And then this represents the number of people that are in that category or range. So the gradual shape that we get is this kind of curve, okay, where most people are in and around the average or the mean height. That we looked at, that is a histogram. Now, you probably learnt in maths that in a histogram, the size of the bars or the blocks represents, or the area of the blocks represents the number of, in this case, people in the population. But the key thing when you're drawing histograms is that, well, you must have a label and then the different categories there, and along the vertical axis here it should say the number, in this case it's adult men. But the key thing is that there are no spaces in between the bars in a histogram. That type of variation is called continuous variation. And there's a gradual change in a characteristic across a population. And the kind of graph. So let's go back to our notes. And the first type of variation, we're thinking of things like height and mass, gradual change. They're examples of continuous variation. Histogram, no spaces. Okay, in your notes it says that this gives you a normal distribution, which is just this shape here. Okay, so very few small, very few at the other end, very tall people. Most people are in and around the average, in this case it's height. Okay, so That's continuous variation. So we need to write our definition. So we said it's a gradual change in a characteristic across a population. Now, some examples. Well, the one that we've talked a lot about is height. We could also have how heavy you are, your mass, skin colour, hair colour, all those kind of things. So you need to write about 3 or 4 things down. Sketch a graph. Well, I want you to write in there that it's a histogram. No spaces. And it is just a sketch. Now, hopefully you're better at drawing than me. All my blocks should have been the same width, so you'll not make the same mistake as me. Blocks should all be the same width. Okay, so if you need to pause the video, do that. Make sure you get that all copied down neatly. Okay, now the other type of variation is the opposite. So the opposite to continuous is discontinuous. So if it's not a gradual change, in this case it's a big change. So big, a difference that's so big that we can actually put organisms into groups. So probably third form, you remember being asked, can you roll your tongue? So this little chap on the top here can roll his tongue, the person underneath can't. Probably if I was to ask how many people in your class could do it, probably I would say about 90%, 80 to 90% can roll their tongue, and the other, say 20% couldn't roll their tongue. So tongue rollers. I have the number of people up the side. There's no connection, there's no scale in this. And so we put a space. So it's not a histogram, it's a bar chart. Example, sometimes used in genetics, is looking at someone's earlobes. And this person's ear, this bit down here is their earlobe. So you can see in the person on the left, their earlobe is attached the whole way to the bottom of their ear. Whereas on the right here, this person's earlobe is detached. Okay, it's only attached a little bit. So that's called detached, attached. Okay, either when you look at someone's ear, it's either going to be attached or it's going to be detached. No in-betweens. It's not just humans. If we look at these cattle, one has horns, the other one doesn't. So it's discrete groups, separate groups. So that's what our definition for discontinuous variation is. Population can be divided into discrete groups. What do we mean by discrete groups? We mean separate. There's no overlap. Okay. It's not always a yes or no situation. So in this case, we've got ladybirds, we've got different numbers of spots. So that's another example of discontinuous variation, the number of spots on a ladybird. You've got A or B or AB or O blood group. You can't be in between. You have to be in one of those 4 categories. So those are all examples of discontinuous variation. Blood group. This next photograph, if you have a good look at it and see if you can work out what is unusual about that. Okay, so you might have worked it out. Instead of having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this person has 6 digits, a thumb and 5 fingers rather than we all have 1 thumb and 4 fingers. So that person has an extra finger. So another example of discontinuous variation might be how many fingers does the person have? 6 or 5 or 4 or whatever. And again, this person here, if we count their toes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, another type of discontinuous variation. Getting back to our notes, we're down here. So the second type is discontinuous variation. Okay, and basically it's saying sharp differences, ABO blood groups, and in this case we use a bar chart and there are spaces. So this is a bar chart showing the number of people in a population that have blood group A and B, AB and O. So spaces in between there, there's no overlap. In terms of finishing our notes on the next page, definition, we've said the population can be divided into discrete groups or categories. And we need 3 examples here. So the ones we talked about were tongue rolling, blood groups, attached or free, another name for detached, earlobes. The graph is a bar chart and it has spaces in between the bars. So we're going to look at blood groups. And it is only a sketch. You don't need to worry about the numbers. So on the side here, we've got the number of people. There we go. Okay, so you might need to pause that just to get that finished. Now, let's have a look at this. So if you pause the video for 30 seconds and work out whether you think these show continuous or discontinuous variation. Okay, so after 30 seconds, you can unpause it. And if we look at skin colour, well, we've said earlier that you can't divide people into groups. There's gradual differences, so that means it's continuous. Anything else that's continuous? Well, body mass, your weight, again is continuous, and height we said was continuous. The length of your little finger, that's going to be continuous. Blood group, you can put people into groups, and so it's going to be discontinuous. Sex, that's like your, well, you know that sex is determined by whether you have 2 X chromosomes or an X and a Y sex chromosome. So it's an either or situation, 2 distinct groups. So that is discontinuous. I'm going to put a question mark beside this one because this is one that we talk about in genetics quite a bit. And we talk about people having blue eyes or brown eyes. In reality, it's not just as simple as that. So we're going to leave that and we'll come back to that one later on. Okay, so you need to look back at the previous page. And at the bottom of that, there are a few questions. So you need to pause the video and answer them. Okay? So I'm going to talk through the answers here. Which characteristics show continuous variation and which show discontinuous variation? So think back to what we said earlier. Ability to roll their tongue, well, that's two distinct groups. That's going to be discontinuous. Height is continuous. Hand span, well, that's going to be continuous. You're measuring numbers. You're not just putting people into groups. Hand dominance, well, you can see there, you're either right-handed or left-handed. So there's no in-between. So that's going to be discontinuous. And gender, male or female, I suppose maybe technically we should be saying the person's sex. But in this case, it's an either-or situation. So it's discontinuous, two distinct groups there. So the answers there for continuous, we're talking about height and hand span. And then for discontinuous, we're talking about tongue rolling, hand dominance, and gender or sex. Question 2, what percentage of pupils are able to roll their tongues? So ability to roll tongue, we've got 1, 2, 3 out of a total of 5 times 100, and you should be able to do that in your head, and you should work out that it's 60%. What type of graph would you use to represent the data for hand span? Well, it is continuous. So therefore, you should know that it's a histogram. And hopefully you'll remember that there's no spaces. Now, what causes people to be left-handed or right-handed, or some people to be taller than others, smaller than others, being able to roll their tongue? Well, it depends on a lot of things. Here we've got, these are the tallest people at some stages in their lives. This guy here was a guy called Robert Wadlow, who was an American, and he is the tallest ever human that's been recorded. He was over 8 feet tall. This guy here is he's the current tallest living person in the world. He's Turkish. And you can see that they are really, really, really tall. So obviously, it's to do with their genes. We've learned a little bit about genes. So it's to do with their genes, but there's also other things that come into play. Back here, if we look at this photograph that an artist, photographer took when he was doing a project on family likenesses, and we've got 4 children from the same family, and it's really obvious that they share a lot of features in common. Looking at their eyes, the colour of their hair, and the shape of their face, their nose, their mouth and everything. Definitely, you would look at those kids and go, yeah, they're related. This family, the sperm cells must have had pretty similar chromosomes to each other, and the egg cells that made each of these children. They've inherited a lot of the same characteristics. And here we've got, this is out of a magazine, we've got 3 celebrities and their sons. So on the left is a guy, I don't know if you recognise him, John Lennon. He was in the Beatles. In the middle, Arnold Schwarzenegger and his son, and then Tom Hanks and his son. And you can see that there are definite likenesses there in the shape of their face and their hair and so on. It's not all. So why is this? Well, this is because you came from half of your mother's chromosomes and half of your father's chromosomes. And that made an egg cell, a sperm cell, and that made you. Your brother or your sister will also have got half of your mother's chromosomes and half of your father's chromosomes. Now, that way, because it is just chance which 23 chromosomes you get. So you might get same ones as similar ones to the rest of your siblings. You might get different ones. And in this family photograph, you can see that the child on the left here, she's inherited her mother's colouring, or her hair. the same shape of her face. If you look at the shape of their face, whereas over here it's much broader. Their eyes there, that little girl's inherited her dad's eyes, whereas her eyes are more the same shape as her mother, and the shape of their face and so on. So it doesn't mean that she's inherited more from one parent than the other, but certain characteristics have been passed on. And these two children don't look alike, but you can see that they do have likenesses in common with their parents. So that there is a lot of variation that is due to genetics, your genes. And we've mentioned there that sex cells, the sperm cells and the egg cells, are produced by a process of meiosis, where half of the mother's and half of the father's chromosomes are selected at random. So that mixes up the combinations of the genes that you get. And so we do get families that look very similar. We get families that look quite different. What else happens? Sometimes there are mutations. And we came across this word in the last topic. And that's where something hasn't been copied properly. There's a little mistake, a change, just a random change. And that can give somebody a different characteristic. Now, in year 10, you might remember Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, learning that they are genetic mutations, and that again causes differences. So the genetic variation, looking at person's genes, because of meiosis, random mixing up of genes, because of mutations, mistakes happening, we do get lots of differences due to genetics. So we're talking about this person here has pink hair. It's not due to her genes, it's due to the fact that she obviously dyed it, or her hairdresser dyed it. And so the environment also has a big effect. Now, when we say environment in this context, we don't mean ecology and things like that. We mean what happens to the person. So it could be they dye their hair, that they go and get some tattoos. It's going to make them look different. In this case, this wee fella here, well, he's not so wee, his diet has had a big impact on his body mass and his shape. And so we're talking here about different aspects of environmental variation. But in fact, a lot of things like height and weight, well, you could have genes that enable you to grow quickly, but if you're not fed, if you don't eat, if when you're a child your parents don't give you calcium to make good healthy bones and so on, you won't actually ever get to be as tall as you might be. And so there is a kind of interaction between your genes and your diet, what you do, whether you get scars and so on. So we're talking about there being a connection between your genetic variation and the environmental variation. Now, the characteristic that you have, whether that is your height or your weight or your skin colour. So the word phenotype is a word that you'll come across in genetics, and it means your height or your weight or your skin colour or what blood group you are. It is the characteristic that we're focusing on. So someone's phenotype really is an interaction between their genes, we talk about their genotype, and the environment. I'm running out of space there. Now, that is written in your notes, and in a moment I'm going to get you to highlight that. What do we mean by that? Well, someone could have the genes to make them grow very big, but as we said before there, if they don't eat a good diet, they're not going to ever get to be that tall. Or maybe somebody has fair skin, and that's their genes determine that they have fair skin, but they lie outside in the sun and they get sunburnt. Now, if we go back, now these photographs show people that have got sunburnt, And whilst it is a bit silly looking and people might laugh at it, you need to remember that sunburn can actually lead to skin cancer. So obviously you wouldn't be as silly as these guys here, lying out in the sun not realising. But what we've got, the sun has changed their skin colour. And so what we said was their phenotype, their skin colour, is determined by their genes, but also the environment has had an effect on that. A lot of the characteristics that you have are really results of interactions of genes and your diet and what happens to you. But we will be looking at some of the more straightforward characteristics in the next lesson. Now, let's get back to our notes. So we're on page 4 in your book, and we've really talked about what causes variation. So it would be sensible to maybe highlight genetic variation. We're looking at DNA, your genes. But we've got mutations and we've got sexual reproduction, because we're talking about meiosis there, mixing up the combinations of chromosomes. And then we've got environmental variation, and what do we mean by that? Could be scars, tattoos, their hair colour, all those kind of things. Down here, this bit here, this is what we ended up with. Phenotype, which is your characteristic, is a result of the interaction between your genotype and your environment. And I would write learn this beside it, because that's really important. At the bottom, this is just a quick recap on what we did in the last topic. Science of genetics explains how characteristics pass from parents to offspring. So, most human cells contain 46 what? Well, I'm sure you all know it's chromosomes. They're made of DNA, and where do you find them? Again, I'm sure you all know that they're found in the nucleus. The next bit is a definition that you should remember from the last one. A blank is a short section of blank which codes for a particular characteristic. So what is that? Well, it's a gene. It's a short section of DNA that codes for a particular characteristic, and each chromosome has got many genes. Okay, so make sure you've got all those written in. And finally, for this assignment, get out the question booklet. All I want you to do is question 1. So it's here and then on the next page here. So question 1, you're not doing the bit with the horses there. That'll only take you a few minutes. What you need to do is just answer the questions, put it on file paper, and then go to the next assignment, and basically you're putting in your answers there, and then I'll be able to mark it. Okay, bye.